I think we have 19 quarterbacks, and DJ Uyunglele is 15th among those 19 quarterbacks. And I would say after watching him play Saturday, he probably is the 15th best quarterback transfer, right?
Hello and welcome to Until Saturday, the Athletics College Football Podcast. It's still week one. We're still waiting on games, but we are here. We got plenty to talk about today. We're going to start with Bruce Feldman coming on to talk to us about his coaching tiers article he did with my co-host Chris Vanini, talking where does each coach stand coming into a season that I think is going to change a lot of narratives for plenty of coaches. After that, we're going to talk to Manny Navarro later in the show. We're going to talk about some impact transfer portal players, guys that are new faces and new places that you need to get to know, and some under the radar games. Everybody knows about Miami, Florida, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, USC, LSU, the big games. But there's still plenty of football that might not be getting as much attention. And Manny and I are going to point that out so that you are well prepared for week one. And of course, we're going to debut a new segment, Message Board Maniacs. We love you, not only because you are the reason that people like me get to talk and write about college football for a job, but you're very entertaining. And sometimes when things go poorly, the entertainment factor goes up. And we'll close, of course, with crunch time and run through the news and notes that you need to know heading into week one. So let's get started. Bruce Feldman, my guest. You guys, I'm sure, know him from The Athletic. And of course, the Audible podcast with Stu Mandel. I've been on there a few times with you guys, Bruce. Bruce, thanks for joining us on the show today. How are you preparing for week one?
I feel like I've been preparing it for like the last month. It's just been, can't wait for the games to get here. Week 0 was actually better than I was anticipating. So that was good. Later this week, I'll head to Morgantown, West Virginia. Our big noon game is Penn State at West Virginia. Should be good. So you mentioned the story with Manny, myself, and Sam Khan also worked on it. I felt like we were making calls about the impact transfers for like pretty much since training camp really got going. Mm-hmm. That turned out to be a great way to prepare for the start of the season, just because all the calls and the intel you're trying to get about who's looking good, maybe who's needs more time to develop or fit in or transition. So I thought it was a fun exercise.
Well, Bruce, you've been doing coaching tiers for a while, coaching rankings. Where does this stand in terms of people getting angry at you? Where does this rank in the things that you do sort of tent poles for the season?
When Stu and I do the top 25 coaches every year, we've been doing it now for like 4 or 5 years, and him longer. That feels like it's a little higher. But the tricky part on this, and I'm about to throw Vanini under the bus, like there's definitely a few where I'll be like, yeah, that's how Chris feels about this guy. I didn't win that argument, or that kind of thing. But there was one that I saw. One of the first comments I saw off of our story that somebody had mentioned on social media was like, hey, you guys have the reigning Big Ten Coach of the Year in Tier 6. What is up with that? And now, first of all, David Braun is he did a terrific job last year, but it's a really small sample size. The second part of it, there's multiple national Coach of the Years in that same tier, and a guy who was a former SEC head Coach of the Year and also Coach of the Year in a couple other conferences, an ACC Coach of the Year and a Pac-12 Coach of the Year. So it's like, you're not going to please everybody. And I'm not saying we're right about everything, because we're not. But there's a lot of stuff where it's like, like Chris and I would have our own little debates internally leading up to this. And you could see it from multiple sides. And there's definitely a give and take. Outside of, I'd say, Kirby Smart, I don't think there was one coach where I was like, oh, yeah, that's definitely a great fit. Because I'm sure, not to give away if anybody hasn't read the story yet, but like we had 2 Tier 1 coaches, Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney. And Stu probably spit out his Cheerios when he saw Dabo Swinney up there. But he guys won 2 national titles. And even if he's fallen off a little since NIL because he doesn't embrace the transfer portal, he's still has quite a history, and it's not like he's fallen off and gone 6-6.
Is it possible to start the chunk of coaches with Tier 3, put Kirby in his own tier, Dabo in his own tier, because you are walking around the recruiting trail with 2 rings, and then start?
I could see that rationale. The tricky part on this is I feel like some of the tier 2 guys are very close to Dabo at this point, right? One of the guys I was pretty passionate about, pushing up on this list was Lance Leipold.
Yeah.
He did an amazing job at Buffalo. He won a bunch of national titles at the D3 level, and he's worked miracles at Kansas, so I'd make a strong case for him to be there. Kalen DeBoer was amazing job. Another guy similar to Leipold, where he had a lot of success at off the radar as a head coach, and then he goes to a program. Now Washington, was down. It wasn't like abysmal like Kansas was, but he got them to the national title game with largely the exact same roster, save for the quarterback who he coached at Indiana when he was an offensive coordinator. So those guys are I feel like right on Dabo's heels, but then you get into like, there's a cluster of like 3 guys. They all have some overlap in Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley, and Brian Kelly from, in their own unique ways where they've been really successful. And especially in the case of, Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley, they've taken over blue-blooded jobs and have won a lot of games, especially Ryan. But at the same point, you got to crack through that next ceiling.
Talking through the tier 2 guys, it's an interesting conversation because you look at most of the list. Kyle Whittingham has built and done some amazing things at Utah. Lincoln Riley, fixes Oklahoma's offense and has been disappointing, but still has improved USC. Mike Norvell gets Kansas State to the playoff. We mentioned Lance Leipold, who dug Kansas out of this huge hole. Brian Kelly, obviously very accomplished at Notre Dame, wins the SEC West in his first year at LSU, wins a Heisman last year. Luke Fickell, fixes the situation at Cincinnati, gets them into the playoff. Kalen DeBoer fixes Washington. Ryan Day, though, is a complicated figure in terms of assessing how he coaches. On the one hand, you do have the overall record, which is like what 44-4 at this point. It's pretty impressive.
It's stacked. More.
But he inherits a good situation. The program seems to have backslid. Where do you stand on Ryan Day, and how much conversation was there about his place, and how do you square, the overall record and winning games and taking care of business and avoiding some of the eye-popping upsets that kind of marred the Urban tenure, and sort of recognizing that he's fallen short of where Ohio State's standards are for this program?
Yeah, I think Ryan Day is a really unique situation, and like the only one who has some similarity is Lincoln Riley, in that they were offensive coordinators and elevated to a really successful program. And what they were able to do was keep some of the best parts of the old regime. In Ryan Day's case, he kept Mickey Marotti, the strength coach, kept Larry Johnson, the line coach, Mark Pantoni, who ran the recruiting office. So there was a lot of, key things he kept in place. Now, like what you said, he has, like, Ohio State has not stubbed its toe like, Ohio State did before him. Urban, he had a bad loss to Purdue, bad loss to Iowa. There would be those times where it was that. Whereas Ryan Day hasn't really lost any of those kinds of games, but he's lost to Michigan, and he's lost 3 times in a row. And that's really the gut punch, but his record, he is 39-3 in the Big Ten and 56-8 overall. That's a staggering record right now. And I don't think you can deny that. I mean, he's beaten a lot of good teams. And by the way, one of those years he lost to Michigan, he came within basically a missed field goal of winning a national title. They were leading Georgia by 2 touchdowns going into the final quarter. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., gets knocked out of the game. And then it comes down to a field goal. Their kicker misses it. If not, they play TCU. And I don't think anybody outside of probably Fort Worth thinks they would have lost to the Horned Frogs. So I think he has honestly a stronger case to be in that second tier than a bunch of other guys based off of that. But I get it. It's there's a lot of pressure on them now. They've gone heavy into NIL, as they probably should have, but losing to Michigan, kind of pushed them into that area. But this is I think you said it at the start of this. There's going to be this is going to be like on a pivotal year for a handful of coaches. And I think Ryan Day is at the top of the list. Short of the national title, if they beat Michigan this year, which I think they will, if they lose to Georgia in the national title game, I don't think it's like not like his job is in jeopardy, but I just think that like that's going to be, maybe not a successful season. Whereas almost anybody else to get to the national title game, unless you're Ryan Day, is probably going to would be a big success.
The what if questions, among recent college football what ifs, if that Ohio State kick goes in, the narratives and landscape of college football would be very, very interesting in terms of Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, Jim Harbaugh, Michigan. All of these things would be pretty interesting. Before people get super angry at you, and I'm sure plenty of folks already are with the coaching tiers, what is you guys' methodology? Because sorting coaches into tiers is a complicated process. Obviously, there's a lot of things to consider, a lot of assessments and check marks, and a coach's job is a lot of different things: talent development, talent acquisition, game management, all those things. What is your methodology for sorting the coaches into tiers?
I think Vanini and I probably have somewhat different rationale. Like, well, he'll be, here's what I'm thinking, and then I'll take issue with some of them based off of, what I'm thinking, and we'll kind of hopefully meet somewhere in the middle. I don't know if we always do, but I think that's kind of the fun part of it. I don't think we're like way off on anything. There's like, you can probably count on two hands how many coaches we disagree on, with some venom in it. Like there's a few where I'm like, yeah, you're right. That guy should be, we kind of come into this land in the same place. But I think by and large, our rationale is more similar than Stu and I, when we have our dueling top 25. I've joked Stu has like the attention span of a house cat. If something happened like 2 years ago, he doesn't think it happened. He doesn't credit it. And whereas, Vanini is much more, gives credit to what happened. I was like, these guys didn't just forget how to coach football, whereas I feel like Stu is much more reactionary with things than I am. And so, look, I still give James Franklin credit on his resume for doing what he did at Vanderbilt, getting them into the top 25 in 2 or 3 years, because they were horrific before he was there, and they've been horrific after he left. The only time they've actually been good was when he was the coach there for 3 years. And I just don't think you just kind of like, oh, it was like a different guy because he's struggled. He hasn't beaten Ohio State in whatever it is, 6 years. I don't think you just completely, it's Ohio State. Almost nobody's beating them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there's no easy answers to these things. A lot of people will point out and go, oh, so-and-so is a terrible game coach. It's like, yeah, you remember anecdotally this or that, but there's a bunch of really, Kirby Smart, he's the clear number one on our list. He's had some bad game coach moments in his history too. And a lot of people will say, he's playing with way better players than everybody else or than most teams he's facing. But, to his credit, he's acquired them and he's helped develop them, and so I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Two guys that I think I would have pushed to maybe move up, and maybe I'm biased because the way that you guys order them in the tiers maybe a little bit. And I think one thing that makes it difficult with the tiers is assessing where is that coach and what is that program's ceiling and how do those two things interact. But for me, the consistency that Mike Gundy has had at Oklahoma State and the consistency that Mark Stoops has had at Kentucky, I think those are two guys that when people talk about like the best coaches in the sport, don't probably get the love that they should. You look at what Mike Gundy has done. Obviously, he had the peaking years in 10 and 11 where they won the Big 12, and even still, falling back, a few years, 7 and 6 2 years ago, but they win 10 games last year in a year that a lot of people had really modest expectations for them. We'll see about them this year. Am I making a strong case for Gundy or Mark Stoops to be included? I think people underrate how difficult it is to win at Kentucky for a number of reasons. I think them recruiting in Ohio, being able to win and doing so and shifting his staff as much as he did. How much do you factor in the quality of the programs themselves?
A lot. Look, I would also factor in, in Stoops' case, he's at Kentucky and he's not the basketball coach. He's the football coach.
Mm-hmm.
It's way harder to win there. And, at one point, I forgot, like, I don't have this stat off the top of my head, but like he's had 2 double-digit win seasons recently, whereas they had like, in the previous 50 years, maybe one. It's just like, I know they play more games now than they did 40 years ago, but he's been able to do some things that nobody is able to sustain at Kentucky. I think the challenge is like, I start looking around who's a tier 3 coach. And I think you could probably argue, Luke Fickell, did really well at Cincinnati. It's too soon to tell what he's doing at Wisconsin. I think he'll get it going there. But like at some of the other guys, I feel like they've just either won at a higher level. Comparing Ryan Day, Brian Kelly, and Lincoln Riley to those guys, I think is tough just because they're at really blue blood schools. Now, Oklahoma State, I would make the case, and you've been there too. In the Big 12, they have some of the best facilities in the Big 12. It's like eating,
especially now
with Oklahoma and Texas out. You look at the other schools. I mean, they're competing with, now Texas Tech has upgraded their facilities recently, but like some of these other schools, it's not like they're anything close to it's Iowa State, it's the Kansas schools, it's TCU, which, only recently became like a Power 5 kind of program. So they're in there with programs that like, it's not the same to me. It's not like they're in the SEC and they're really punching up all the time. But he's, Gundy's had a long-term sustained success, and he's another one that's like tough to, he has 2 really good years and then 1 year that's not so good. But again, he's at a place where he's not at Oklahoma. I think when I go through this, I'm basically, trying to look for a like coach, and the like coach in this case is Kyle Whittingham. And to me, I would put Kyle Whittingham just a slight notch above him.
Whether getting texts, getting calls, comments, Twitter, whatever, who have you seen the most pushback on where you have him placed in the tier system?
This year it's too soon to tell, I'll be honest. Like there's been a time or two you get like a thanks man comment, like, it's like said with disdain.
You got to wait till they get an upset or pull an upset or get upset in week 1 before people really want to start throwing rocks.
Yeah. We had this, we worked on this last week, but it, kept on working on it through the weekend. I mean, I wouldn't have bumped Mike Norvell. Like we bumped him up a spot this year. I wouldn't like overreact to one, to a loss to Georgia Tech. I feel a little bit better about like our comments on Brent Key. Again, it's early with him, but I think he's had a really nice start. He's doing well in recruiting, by all accounts. And I think we probably had him higher than I think most people would have like expected him to be. Remember, he wasn't the favorite to get the job when he got the interim tag. So, these things are, as they say, very, very fluid.
Bruce, are you worried at all about getting blackballed from a Colorado press conference for having Deion in tier 6?
I hadn't really thought about that. And let's be honest, I don't, it's not like I'm going to press conferences either. I hadn't thought of that. Everything is such like a microwave thing. I watched some clip. I don't know if it was yesterday it went up or Saturday about a local reporter had asked Deion something. And I was just like, I listened to the response. It was like 2 minutes. And I'm like, I'm not really sure how to feel on this in terms of the way the question was brought up. And then I listened to Deion's answer, and Deion, the way I interpreted the answer was like, hey, this is what drives me. This is what, and again, Deion Sanders is one of the greatest football players in the history of the sport, right? And so when he's talking up there, I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, of course I get why Deion, would be dismissive of anybody who's like, who is either literally questioning him in a lot of ways, just because you don't know what it took to do what I've done. You haven't seen what I've done. I get that. I think the parts of that are kind of more into a gray area are Deion's not wired like most of the people who play college football. They probably have different motivations. They probably have a focus that's not the same. They probably don't have the same work ethic. There's just a lot of different parts of it. but I think it's like, I'm like, I've been around him enough in bigger settings to listen and go like, yeah, I kind of now get what he's talking about. But at the same time, I think it's such a unique, and you've been around this way more than me. It's such a unique media like ecosystem there. I don't think there's anything quite like it, because you don't have anybody in terms of the level of celebrity as a coach, in terms of the level of success that they've had. Like all these guys to some degree were like a star at some point, but they were not Deion Sanders, So I think what comes with that is really fascinating, just if you take like two steps out of it. But man, you can't look away from any of this. It's just very interesting on all sorts of levels.
You guys don't include first year FBS coaches, so we'll leave them out of it. But when you look at guys who you think have a season ahead where they might be moving up a tier, or you could see a breakout season for them coming on, anybody jump out to you on guys that are moving up?
Yeah, there's a few. Like, look, I think John Sumrall is one of the best coaches that's become a head coach in like the last 5 years. What he did at Troy was fantastic. I think he will do really well at Tulane. I think he's one of those guys. I think there's a batch, like Brent Key was somebody where you're kind of like, okay, this is going to be interesting, because like they've changed a culture of how that place is. And I just think it's a little different from Jeff Collins in terms of like, I don't want to say style versus substance, but it does feel a little in those lines. I would say Mike Elko has a chance to really spring up. He did a really good job in his first couple of years there. I also think the one that I think is a really good coach, and to me, this is a year where people I think are going to like, oh yeah, that guy is a really good coach, is Matt Rule. I mean, his first two spots. What's that?
I was going to bring him up. Yeah.
Yeah. No, his first two spots, he was really rough year at Temple, really rough year at Baylor. And David, you and I both covered Baylor down there. Like, he took over an awful situation. It was toxic.
Yeah.
In Waco. And I thought he did an amazing job, not just on the field, but optics of how he answered questions and everything. And I have a ton of respect for him as a coach and as a leader in that capacity. They struggled last year. Obviously, no secret, didn't make a bowl game. They haven't been to a bowl game in a long time. The previous two times he got his team after a really dismal first year into a bowl game year two. I think he's going to do that this year with Nebraska. Schedule is favorable. I can see them maybe winning 8 games. And I think he will be a guy who we will be moving up at least a tier or two after this year.
I think so. I'm really intrigued. I'm going to see them week 2 when they play Colorado. I think you guys undersold what he did at Temple and what he did at Baylor, getting them from where that program was to the Sugar Bowl. And that's pretty incredible. I do think, another guy that jumps out to me, Alex Golish, young coach, hasn't really done a whole lot. Last year was his first, year as a head coach at USF. They got some pieces to really, they're going to score a bunch of points this year. They bring back a ton on offense. But I think he is a guy that the more he's in the spotlight and the more teams play, the more people watch his teams, I think he's a guy that is going to be a big time head coach very, very soon.
Was it you? Like, so I'm with you on that. Like, I had 4 guys who, I'm trying to think if they were tier 4 guys, tier 5 guys. They were tier 5 guys. I had 4 of them who I think will move up at least one spot next year. Alex Golish, Ryan Silverfield, GJ Kinney, Barry Odom. I want to say somebody in our fantasy draft took Byron Brown. Whoever that was, I was like, he's not going to win the Heisman, but he will put up big numbers in that system. He's really talented. It wouldn't shock me if he ended up finishing like 6th.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I mean, they got a bunch of dudes, and they're going to be a fun team to watch in the G5. I mean, all the attention obviously on Boise and Memphis, and you see some Fresno love out there, and obviously people want to yell about Liberty. But I'm with you. I think Texas State with GJ Kinney and USF with Alex Golish, you want to see some points. They're going to put them up. They're 2 of probably the most fun teams. Like, if they're on, I want to watch them. So I'm
Were
looking forward
you
to it.
like, I know you're a Mizzou guy. Like, you didn't
Mhm.
overlap with Barry Odom, did you at all?
No, I mean I know him a little bit, but no, I've I think I had moved. I was covering Tennessee, I think, when
Okay.
he was at Missouri. But yeah, I know him a little bit, but not a ton. I think he's making the most of his second opportunity, and I still think Bobby Petrino leaving them in the cold and him bringing in Brendan Marion was pretty unbelievable, and I think it definitely improved their outlook a season ago, and they were shocked to be able to keep him for a second year in Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, look, that was the best year UNLV's had in like 40 years. He has
Mm-hmm.
two young coordinators, one on each side of the ball. Like, I agree, Brennan was pretty marketable, and there were some head coaching jobs. I think he sniffed around a little bit. They lose their starting quarterback who transfers to USC. I know they have a really big time receiver in Ricky White. I think that
Yep.
they get Boise at home. I don't, again, I don't know if they're going to be the team that comes out of the group of five, but I've known him for a long time, dating back to his GA days, 25 years ago. He's a guy who I think has really learned after his first go round as a head coach and made some really smart and thoughtful adjustments to how he runs a program. And I could see him, winning 10 games this year, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden be a fairly hot commodity again.
Yeah.
What comes open.
It's definitely possible. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining the show. It's always good to catch up with you. I'm sure I'll see you on the road at some point this year. You can see Bruce, of course, on Big Noon Kickoff as well, and on the Fox networks, as well as on the Audible and on the athletic.com. If you want to read the entire athletic coaching tiers from my co-hosts Chris Vanini and Bruce, the link will be in the description. So go check that out. And we'll be back here in a second with Manny Navarro and our sneaky week 1 games, as well as the Impact transfer portal list, which Bruce helped out with that as well. Been fun. Bruce, thank you for joining the show. We'll see you again soon.
See you on the road, David.
We are back, joined by Manny Navarro. I'm sure you've heard him on the feed if you are a longtime listener. If you're not, Manny is our ACC expert, but he does a lot of other stuff for us as well. And that includes recently looking at the 100 biggest impact transfers alongside Sam Kahn and Bruce Feldman, who you heard from earlier in the show. Manny, thanks for joining. I think this is going to be a constant in college football. I think the raw numbers of transfers will thin down as we get something close to normalcy in college football. But for now, keeping track of the new faces and new places across the sport is going to be a challenge. And if you have not been paying attention or need a refresher, this is a fantastic guide. The link you'll find in the show's description. But Manny, what was it like trying to figure out who the 100 most impactful transfers of this season were going to be and sort through a lot of the reporting and figuring out that list?
Well, first of all, let me just give all the credit to Sam and Bruce, who are probably as plugged in as anybody in college football, being able to get coaches on the phone. We worked on this for about 2 weeks, and it was a haul. I did maybe 5 to 10% of the work. They did the rest because they're so good at what they're doing. But it's fun. Calling these general managers, these assistant coaches, these staffers to get hey, what do guys really look like on the team, and not just, hey, what did they do last year and we're just going to project what they're going to do now type questions. It's good. It feels like real reporting. It feels like we're getting to really understand the impact that some of these guys are going to make with their teams. I just went back and looked at our list now, and I saw that I think we have 19 quarterbacks, and DJ Uyunglele is 15th among those 19 quarterbacks. And I would say, after watching him play Saturday, he probably is the 15th best quarterback.
Yeah,
transfer, right?
I would believe that. Yeah, I would believe that.
So
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's not a perfect science, obviously, David, because some of these coaches have egos, right? And they think they can get more out of guys than maybe where they were at before.
Yeah.
So we may get a little bit of a fibbing, right? With, hey, we think this guy is top 10, top 20 in the country overall. But I think for the most part, it's an honest take.
Yeah, it's always an interesting exercise, and there's some level of guessing because you have new guys and new places. And you guys had Caleb Downs at number 1 on your list, obviously going from Alabama to Ohio State. One of the highest profile transfers, probably the most talented transfer. But when you look at this list and you look at the transfers in the sport, who do you think will have the biggest overall impact on their team's win-loss record?
Well, it's definitely the quarterbacks. I mean, I think obviously Dylan Gabriel, Oregon was such a great program last year, obviously with Bo Nix. Didn't get to the playoff because they lost twice to Washington. But people are expecting Oregon to make the 12-team field, and they're expecting them to contend for the Big Ten title. And the quarterbacks are going to have their ball in their hands. So they automatically, in my book, are always going to be viewed as the most impactful. Cam Ward at Miami is another great example. Miami has a chance, I think, to win the ACC this year. Riley Leonard at Notre Dame. Those are going to be the headliners. Those are the guys that probably get in the Heisman discussion. But there's so many other really good, defensive players, receivers, running backs. Nick Scourton, I think at Texas A&M, who we rank 3rd, might be the best pass rusher in college football this season with Mike Elko as coach. Didn't really have a lot of support around him at Purdue when you think about it. And now at Texas A&M, he's going to have better players around him. So, you could take your list, but I think ultimately we're going to be sitting here talking about quarterbacks at the end of the season.
It's interesting when you look at the impact transfers. They're not package deals, but there's kind of a few 1-2 punch guys, and there's one very close to you in Cam Ward and Damian Martinez. They've played a lot of football. They're guys who would be playing in the Pac-2 or the Pac-12 if it had not exploded. But when you look at those two guys, there's been a lot of attention paid to them. What do you think people can honestly expect out of that offensive backfield? That there's a lot of pressure on them. There's a lot of expectation. But what are those two guys going to bring to Miami?
Well, I think a lot of it from Cam Ward is leadership. We've talked on this show previously last week, not too long ago. We did our ACC tiers about Ward and just being the alpha male, right? And how much Mario Cristobal loves all that kind of stuff. Miami didn't have that with Tyler Van Dyke. He was more of a quiet behind the scenes guy. Cam Ward is the alpha, right? And we've seen how that can make an impact on some teams. Maybe we make too much of it as sports writers, right? Maybe it's too much of a romantic idea. Oh, he's such a great leader, and that's why this team is here. But I kind of buy it. I do. I've been around this. You've been around this long enough where one guy at a certain position, if he is, the alpha, so to say, and he's a great player, he can lift other guys around him to much better seasons than they're probably normally capable of. And so I look at Cam Ward and that ilk, and I certainly think Damian Martinez could end up being the best running back in this class. I know people are automatically going to say, well, you're crazy. It's Quinshon Judkins at Ohio State, but there's so many great playmakers at Ohio State that I just think Damian Martinez could potentially have better numbers at the end of the season than Judkins. He's got, Trevion Henderson in the backfield with him. Damian Martinez has a second year talent and Mark Fletcher behind him. It's not the same thing. So I think Martinez and Ward at the end of the year could put up huge numbers and be the reason why Miami, especially after what we just saw from Florida State, is really in the running for the ACC championship.
The other package deal I think is really interesting is you go out to Oregon. We kind of know what we have in Dylan Gabriel. You've seen him, at UCF. We saw him at Oklahoma. Evan Stewart is a little bit more of a conundrum because we've seen flashes from him at Texas A&M, but we've been talking about him, for a while. And in the offense last year, there just was not a lot of, opportunity for him to shine. He made some plays, but he wasn't necessarily the big time talent that we were hoping to see in this offense with an experienced quarterback. And picking up Dylan Gabriel, I think, gives Oregon a real opportunity to not have any fall off at all, going away from Bo Nix and going to Dylan Gabriel. What do you think we're going to see out of Evan Stewart? Because I really think we could see, with Tez Johnson also there, I don't know that you're going to have the gigantic 1,800 yard seasons, but 13, 15, I think is somewhat possible. Am I too high on Evan Stewart, or what do you think this is going to look like for him in this offense where, they kept Will Stein as well as OC?
Yeah, I mean, look, Oregon, I think, they're going to average well over 40 points again, even going to the defensive-minded Big Ten. Let's think about this. We're talking about how these Pac-12 Pac-12 teams, former Pac-12 teams, are going to have to adjust to playing in the defensive Big Ten. I don't know that the Big Ten has seen this kind of consistent speed every single week that they'll see from Oregon, right? And just being able to fling the football around and have such a diverse attack. I mean, who's really that kind of an offense? Ohio State, maybe, right? We don't even know if Will Howard is necessarily going to be as good necessarily as Dylan Gabriel at his position, even with all those playmakers. So Oregon adds a whole new wrinkle. I think you're going to see them just have a ton of success. And I watched Evan Stewart last year when Texas A&M came to Miami. He didn't have a humongous day in that game, and Miami ended up winning that game, but he still made an impact, and he still looked like a special receiver. So the fact that we've got him in our top 10 is deserving, in my opinion. He's definitely a top 10 transfer.
We'll get to some more guys in a little bit, but when you look at this list and the conversations that you've had, who's an under the radar guy that hasn't gotten the offseason headlines? Some of the guys that we've talked about that you think may or may not be a household name come November, October, but is going to have a lot of impact on his team's bottom line that isn't getting enough attention coming into the season.
I think Deion Burks. I mean, we have him in our top 10, and he was good at Purdue last year, but the talk on him from folks at Oklahoma is he is a dude. Like he is going to seriously break out on this Oklahoma team. And look, 47 catches, 629 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. Purdue did not play on prime time. Oklahoma's in the SEC. They're going to be on TV every single week. Everybody's going to see Oklahoma. And Jackson Arnold, I think, is a really gifted quarterback, might be one of the best, if not the best, in his class. We'll see what Nico has to say about that over at Tennessee. But I think Deion Burks is going to put up huge numbers. And that's a dude that when I look at that offense and just the way that they want to attack downfield, like he's going to be a huge weapon. I don't think most people know too many players that were on Purdue's roster last year, just like Scourton, right? Like we know it because we're football guys, but I don't know that the casual fan has heard of Deion Burks and the kind of impact that he had at Purdue. And so he'll be on the scene this year. I think he'll have a big season. As I go down the list, there's certainly more guys that were sort of in smaller programs that I think will make an impact. I think Silas Bolden coming over from Oregon State to Texas. Little guy, 5'8", 155 pounder, not huge, but he's dangerous. Texas needs a lot of receivers to step up. They lost their top 3 pass catchers at the end of last season. So there's a lot of opportunity to come in there. He's somebody that we had ranked really, really high. There's a bunch of guys. Marcus Harris. I know the guys at Cal. Marcus Harris is a cornerback from Idaho that the Cal coaching staff, when they brought him in, they liked him. But I think when he got on campus, it was one of those, whoa, wait a minute, he might be our best cornerback. And
always good when that happens.
Yeah, it's always like, wait a minute, this guy's a lot better than we thought he was. He runs a 4.3 in the 40. I think he's got a ton of speed, NFL potential. But again, he was at Idaho, right? So we didn't pay attention to him at all. He could be one of the best cornerbacks in the ACC this year as Cal makes the transition over there. I mean, there's so many guys. That's why I would tell you and encourage our listeners and readers to read this story, because between Bruce, Sam, and I, and the amount of work that we put into this, we got a lot of neat little factoids. John Pius, the edge rusher from William and Mary. Nobody knows who John Pius is, right? He's at Wisconsin now. Elite FCS player, 6'3", 250. The coaches at Wisconsin were telling us that he's going to lead the team in sacks this year. And people, I'm telling you right now, people who didn't watch Wisconsin last year or briefly tune into one of their games, they're going to look at John Pius and be like, who the hell is that guy? Where did he come from? Oh, he's from William and Mary. So there's going to be a lot of those moments, because I do believe there's a lot of FCS and lower tier FBS guys that were a group of 5 schools that can make the jump up and have impactful impacts, like big time impactful impacts on their team. And I think Pius is another one to watch out for.
As far as the big names, Walter Nolen is an interesting name, a guy that was a former number 1 recruit, one of the more interesting recruitments that we've seen, kind of bouncing around, kind of figuring out what that was going to look like. Goes to Texas A&M, kind of a little bit similar to Evan Stewart, showed some flashes, didn't really work out. Now he's at Ole Miss after Jimbo Fisher gets fired. Are you in or out on him as a guy that can just start being a monster like people thought he was going to be in the recruiting process. He gets a little bit older. He has a change of scenery. I think if Ole Miss is going to be a playoff team and make good on a lot of the potential that they have, they're going to need him to star. Are you buying Walter Nolen stock at this point?
I am because I think, first of all, when he was at Texas A&M, there were so many other good players with him. Let's not forget that class that Jimbo put together had some really good defensive linemen that were 5 and 4 star guys. And I think for Walter Nolen, it was sort of a matter of, okay, when is he really ready? I think he's ready now. This is year 3 for him in college football. I think, some guys bloom a little bit later than others. He's uber talented. I think his body, 6'3", 305, the explosion that he's got. Everything we've heard is that, at Ole Miss, he is going to be the dude. He is going to be the guy in that defense. And everybody's expecting Ole Miss, obviously, to contend for a playoff spot this year, potentially win the SEC. And I think he is going to be at the center of it all for that defense. And we're going to be talking about him all year long.
The people made a lot about the Quinshon Judkins move. And I think the word is out from running backs. I think you're making some money, but you're not making NFL money. And I think running backs understand the less tread on your tires when you get to the pros, the better.
Oh, yeah.
And for all the noise about the Quinshon Judkins, move to Ohio State and what's waiting there for him at Ohio State with Travion Henderson, those guys splitting those duties and Judkins being a little shiftier also. I think it's going to work out pretty well for both of those guys because you don't have a lot of drop off, either way, even though they're not going to maybe have the numbers that they would have if Judkins was at Ole Miss and if Henderson was still the lead back and really the only guy at Ohio State, which he's not anymore. But I think it's going to work out for them long term. But when you look at you guys' list and maybe some guys that earned a lot of headlines, are there anybody that you think people maybe have too high of expectations for, whether that be production or impact or anybody that people might want to calm down a little bit on?
That's a great question. I'm going over the list right now as we're looking. Guys that I personally think were a little overrated or maybe that we put a little bit too high. That's a good question. Wow. I think Aiden Chiles at Michigan State, look, I know he's talented, but I think it's tough to expect a second-year guy to come in and all of a sudden, especially somebody like Chiles who played just some at Oregon State. It wasn't like he played a ton. To come into the Big Ten and have a lot of success. He could be very good by the end of the season, but like instant impact, like all of a sudden Michigan State's going to win 8-9 games. That's not going to happen with Aiden Chiles. Like there's going to be growing pains with him. He doesn't turn 19 until next month. And while I think he's super, super talented, I thought putting him at 14, like we did on our list, was probably a little too high just because it's going to take a while for him to get there. But there's other guys that you could sit here and point out that are just, new to a new conference. You never know when you change conference. I think it's almost better when you stay in conference because at least you have a little bit of familiarity with your opponents. Chiles was in the Pac-12 and coming over to the Big Ten, which we talked about earlier, was a great defensive conference. I think there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period for him.
Well, Manny, let's shift gears and let's look at some of the under the radar games for week 1. Everybody knows about Notre Dame, Texas A&M, USC, LSU, and Vegas. Even Penn State, West Virginia will be an interesting ball game. Lots of big headline games, even if there's not the mammoth showdown. Georgia Clemson probably doesn't qualify. But there's a bunch of good football games. We're going to talk about the big games later on this week. But let's look at some under the radar games that people might not be as excited about, but they should be. I'm going to start with Oklahoma State and South Dakota State. If you weren't paying attention to the FCS polls, South Dakota State enters the season ranked number 1 overall. Oklahoma State opens the season as one of the favorites for the Big 12. It's going to be an interesting game. South Dakota State has definitely been in this position before. They have beaten some FBS teams before. Oklahoma State famously gets punked by South Alabama a year ago, still wins 10 games. They lost to Central Michigan a few years ago. They've had some odd results. Manny, when you look at this game, what stands out to you about what we're going to see in this ball game and what Oklahoma State can show us? And, if Ollie Gordon actually ends up getting 60 carries in this game.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, 8 of the top 13 tacklers for South Dakota State are back from last year's championship winning team. So, yes, Ollie Gordon, I don't think is just going to run all over this team by any stretch. He's probably going to have to work it pretty hard. Look, Oklahoma State is definitely a Big 12 contender in my mind. I got them going to the conference championship this year, but this is definitely one of those games that I would tune in to watch just because you've got the whole David versus Goliath thing, right? San Diego State playing for an FCS program. We've seen it before. We saw Appalachian State back when they were at the FCS level knock off Michigan in the Big House. So to me, I'm tuning in to watch this game for that alone.
Yeah, I'm in on this ball game. It's going to be pretty interesting, pretty exciting. If you haven't watched South Dakota State before, you should. They were electric in the playoffs last year. Another interesting game. Not a ton of expectation for Houston in year 2 in the Big 12, but they do have a new coach in Willie Fritz. And UNLV, I think, is a team that people are sleeping on in the Group of 5 competition. They lose Jade Mayava. Everybody writes them off, but they still do have Ricky White. We talked about him a little bit with Bruce earlier, as well as Brennan Marion, Barry Odom, and his defenses. This is a team that I think can really surprise some people. And if you're in UNLV and you go out in week 1 and you beat a Big 12 team, that's pretty that's a nice little plaque you can hang on your wall to start your season. And if you haven't watched a lot of UNLV, what Brennan Marion does with the go-go offense is incredibly entertaining. And Willie Fritz also, has a very entertaining offense himself. A lot of triple option concepts in there, a lot of triple option concepts in Brennan Marion's go-go offense with a lot of vertical routes that are paired with that. It's going to be fun. I think you're going to see a lot of points. I'm in on this game. Manny, where do you, how hard are you going to be pushing to get UNLV Houston on one of your screens?
I mean, listen, Houston, you mentioned them being a Power 4 team. Like, are they really, have they really recruited to
I looked at the Big 12
yet?
roster. They're in the Big 12. They're in the Big 12 standings. I promise you, I checked. They're still there.
Yes, but are they legitimately a Big 12 team? Like, do they have a Power 4 offensive and defensive line? Like, look, Houston's always had players. They always recruit well because there's so much talent in the state of Texas. They're always going to have dudes. But to me, I still view this as a group of 5 games because Willie Fritz just got there. He's going to have to need a little bit of time to upgrade the roster. I have no doubt that he's going to make Houston a good program, and the Big 12 is wide open. I don't know that there is a dominant team. Somebody's just going to take the league by storm and win it 5 out of the next 6 years. So I think Houston can become a contender, but Willie Fritz just got there. Like, pump your brakes on this PA.
I just think it's going to be fun football. I love fun football. I think it's going to be very fun. I don't know how high my expectations are for Houston. I think UNLV can win that ball game. I'd probably take UNLV in that ball game, but it's going to be very, very fun to watch. My next one on the list, I want to see what you got. Michigan debuts Fresno State, a team that a lot of people are kind of throwing in that G5 sleeper, a team that might be in the mix for a playoff bid. Michigan, we don't really know what they're going to look like post Harbaugh. I think people really expecting Alex Orji. We don't really know how well can he throw the ball. Donovan Edwards in a starring role. Is he going to be the guy that people hope that he is? What do their offensive line and defensive lines look like? I think defensively they're going to be really, really good. Offensive line, they're still replacing a lot. They got a lot to prove. And it's a game against Fresno State that, Fresno might, if that's a game that's like 13-13 at halftime, I don't know that I'd be all that shocked. I think if they can win that game, I'd be shocked, but I could see maybe Michigan stumbling out of the gate a little bit. Where are you on Fresno going up to the Big House, Manny?
Yeah, I would watch this game for sure, in large part because I just want to see what Michigan looks like coming off of that championship, because that alone in itself is intriguing. I picked Michigan to make the 12-team playoff this year in the preseason prognostications, but Fresno State's a good test. Like, that's a team that could definitely go in there, and we could have a game in the fourth quarter if Michigan is not sort of on the ball. And God knows they certainly have a lot of distractions, right? With everything going on off the field. So
they're going to be in the Netflix top 10 this week.
They will be in the Netflix top 10. So yeah, I'm watching this game. I would tune in for this one.
My next game, not far away in East Lansing. Manny, despite hating on Mr. Aiden Chiles, Michigan State, I really want to see what Jonathan Smith does in his debut. Expectations are moderate for them, but they get Tom Herman, Cam Fancher, and the Florida Atlantic Owls. I think this is another one that's going to be a fun game. I think Michigan State is a pretty proud program, and seeing them fall off, late in Mel Tucker's tenure, and then, last year, once he was gone, that was tough to watch. I felt bad for Michigan State fans, and now, without a lot of expectation, you might have a little excitement. I want to see this game. I think it's going to be a fun game. Tom Herman's still kind of climbing, trying to reclaim a little bit of respect of his own at Florida Atlantic. I'm in on this one. Manny, you're not far from Florida Atlantic. What are we going to see out of the Owls here?
Yeah, we're about an hour drive away from Boca Raton. So I love going to that campus, by the way. They've got an on-campus stadium that's nice. It's got a beautiful view. You can see the ocean not too far from there. So I like going to FAU's campus. But this game is going to be played up at Michigan State, and they're nowhere near the ocean. So I would expect that Michigan State would win this game. I know Tom Herman is still trying to sort of rebuild this thing. Cam Fancher is going to help. But they're still not there yet, FAU, as far as where Lane Kiffin had them a couple of years ago. I looked at this roster. They're not ready. They shouldn't be ready to beat a Big Ten team. So I would watch just because I kind of like the Owls. And like I said, they're close by. But I expect Michigan State to win this game. And I wouldn't say convincingly, but without a problem.
Manny, if you need any timeshares or anything in Boca, Manny's your guy. So
that's right.
Make sure to
Never forget I'm selling.
hit him up on Twitter for all of your real estate needs in Boca. And finally, Manny, we have two teams that I think are surprising teams. Miami of Ohio picked to win the MAC, and Northwestern, who won. People were talking about them. Is this going to be the worst Power 5 team ever last year? And then they go and win 8 games and a bowl game. Really, really impressive year. We'll see what David Braun has for year 2. Chuck Martin also made some news last week, tossing some tampering allegations. We talk about it on the show. I mean, I'm sure there's probably some truth to it. Proving it is difficult, and defining tampering is difficult. But either way, this is going to be a fun game, and I think this will be a game where both of these teams, if they can win, will feel pretty good. And if you lose it, there's gonna be some disappointment there. People are sleeping on this game. I don't think anybody is going to be super fired up to watch it, but they should be. There's going to be more on the line than people think. Manny, can you buy into a little bit of Midwestern ball?
I'll buy in, and part of it is because I want to see Miami of Ohio's kicker miss 5 field goals in this game and be the reason they lost.
Yes.
Because I just want to hear
press conference from Chuck Martin.
I just want to hear it to us. Yes, I want to hear that. I want to hear him really go after Alabama for taking their kicker. You say, see what you guys did to me? You allowed this to happen, and that's why we lost this game. I don't know. Miss 4 extra points is probably better than 5 field goals. Something real easy, and that's why they lose.
I love it. I'm excited for week 1. We got plenty of picks coming later in the week. But now, Manny, you know what time it is?
Let's go for it.
It's time for a new segment. And we are going to go with Message Board Maniacs. Our producer Cam, of course, Message Board Genius, is always good at mining some of the best social media posts. And listen, here's the deal with this. I love insane fans. I love the reactionary nature. That's sort of the sport. This sport has been driven by opinion for so long. That's what the polls were. Still now, you get 13 people sitting in a room deciding who the teams that get to play for a national championship are. And fans' opinions are not always as level-headed. And we had some results on Saturday that left people searching for answers and running to the message boards, Manny. I like the crazy fans. They help give people like us jobs. They make our jobs more entertaining. And so with that said, it's time to look at our first few posts, Manny. Our first post comes from the Knowles 24/7. Tampa Knoll 1993 says,
I saw this one.
We are now locked into a 10-year contract with a guy who straight up can't recruit high school and tries to duct tape a team together in the portal each year. Eventually, it was going to bite us, and we saw that tonight. Manny, I forgot. Can you remind me how many games in the regular season Mike Norvell lost last year? Was it 0? I think it was 0. But listen, he goes undefeated last year, and you go to Ireland across the Atlantic Ocean. You lose to a Georgia Tech team that's probably going to win 7-8 games. Where are you at on the bees, Manny?
I think they are probably right around that mark, right around 7-8 wins. They still got to play Georgia at the end of the season, so I'm never going to go over like with 9 wins and get crazy, but 7-8 wins is doable.
So you lose to that team, and all of a sudden you're a bum. Such is life in college football. As entertaining as it is for us, I would recommend coaches and players, please stay off the message boards. Although, if you want to post, have at it. My favorite message board notes were the time when they figured out, I forget what his job was, but they figured out that like someone very high up in the White House was consistently posting on TexAgs, or I think he was at the Department of Energy or something along those lines. You never know who's posting this stuff. So, hey, it is what it is. Our next post comes from the SMU game over the weekend on the Pony Express. Pony Fan 81, a well-known member, says, really wish I'd stepped away from my fandom and put my entire net worth on under 8.5 for the season. A lot of Nevada disrespect here. I think, Manny, you'd have to refresh my memory, but did they win that game?
Yeah, they came back and won, believe it or not.
I think SMU won that game. These are the
Didn't cover the 28-point spread, though.
These are the thanks you get for winning your season opener on the road in Reno, Nevada. Listen, SMU looked not great, definitely sloppy, but a win is a win. And you know who would love to be 1-0 right now, Manny? The Florida State Seminoles. The Florida State Seminoles, as Knowles 24/7 poster, Law Horv. Sure. Is that backwards or something? I don't know. That Florida State put the ASS in embarrassing.
They did at the end of that game.
Georgia Tech's good, guys. You can't lose that game, but come on. If that game happens in October, I feel like, people are not as fired up about it. Either way, thank you, message board posters. You add flavor to college football. It is a thing that is wholly unique to college football. There's college basketball, message boards a little bit. It's not quite as culturally ingrained. For whatever reason, these things have not penetrated the NFL sphere. I think there's some soccer ones, from the Man U people. There's some big fan sites, but.
And I got to send you, somebody posted this on Twitter, but it was a photo. This is a Florida State fan. It was a photo of a car window and the glass was broken. And they
saw this.
You saw this one where he says somebody broke in and put 4 tickets to the BC game in my front seat.
I'm not in on Florida State this year, but they'll be fine. And their coach went 13-0 last year, and then we won't talk about what happened after that. But I love the lack of perspective. It's very entertaining, and I think the funny thing about message board posting is you can look at it and say these people are crazy. But I'll tell you, you talk to enough boosters, you get to know boosters, you talk to administrators who deal with them. There's a lot of these people that might not post on a message board, but they have the message board brain, and they are deciding coaches' fates in more instances than you might think about, or the more than you think. So
100%.
It is a very real thing, and God bless message board posters. I love you. I think we're going to be featuring some of our favorite message board posts sort of intermittently through the season. We're going to be having a bunch of running segments, but Message Board Maniacs will be a new one. I look forward to digging through the treasure trove that is angry fans. I think, Manny, I feel like if there's Vegas odds on TexAgs making an appearance on this show, if Texas A&M loses to Notre Dame,
very strong.
I feel very strong. We're gonna have can we get Mike Elko and send him back to Kmart or all? I feel like there's a lot of potential here if they lose in their first game after the Jimbo experiment did not go well. We got $125 million for this if they lose that game. There's a lot of potential there. So, folks, it's going to be great. I'm excited for it. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you are not subscribed to the show, you need to change that immediately. Subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We are there. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts as well. And the show notes, you can see all the links to the stories we talked about today. At Spotify, we have our Spotify poll as well. And subscribe to us on YouTube. You can see our smiling faces. You can see my favorite timeshare salesman at The Athletic, Manny Navarro, with his headset, talking to us. We always appreciate you coming on, Manny. And thank you guys. Without you, wouldn't have a show. So thank you. Subscribe, do all those things. Leave us a review. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you guys on Thursday for our picks show with Chris Vanini, with Damian Harris. It's going to be great. We are relaunching the show, and we're back 3 times a week. Football is here. So thank you for Manny Navarro, for Bruce Feldman. I am David Ubben. Thanks for tuning in to Until Saturday. And of course, Manny, we got to bring back the turnover chain. One day you'll find it, and you'll be wearing it on an appearance, and I will want to give you a hug to the screen.
If Miami wins the ACC, I'm going to find it and bring it on the show for sure.
That sounds beautiful, and my dream will come to fruition. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys on Thursday.